On November 13, 2025, the world stands at a crossroads as Russia and NATO face their most fragile relationship in decades. The language of diplomacy has given way to open confrontation, with both sides preparing for potential conflict. This is not a simple continuation of Cold War tensions, but a new, unpredictable chapter in European security, driven by modern grievances and ongoing warfare. NATO's eastward expansion is seen by Moscow as a threat, while NATO views its actions as a necessary defense against Russian aggression. Military buildups and exercises, especially around Kaliningrad, have created a hair-trigger environment where a single miscalculation could have devastating consequences. The mechanisms for dialogue have broken down, leaving Europe once again the stage for a dangerous geopolitical struggle. The Kremlin's message is clear. Russia is bracing itself for scenarios that, until recently, seemed unimaginable. In the halls of power, officials speak in measured tones, but the underlying tension is unmistakable. The world is watching as Moscow signals its readiness for a new era of confrontation. Russia is watching NATO's military preparations with grave concern and is ready for any eventuality. High-ranking Russian officers scrutinize every move, analyzing NATO's exercises and deployments along the border. The atmosphere is one of vigilance, with both sides wary of missteps that could escalate into open conflict. In response, Russia has restructured its military, created new districts, and deployed advanced weaponry along its western borders, especially after Finland joined NATO. The establishment of new command centers and the movement of cutting-edge missile systems are clear signals of Moscow's intent to fortify its defenses. Troop movements near the Finnish border underscore the seriousness with which Russia views the shifting security landscape. Moscow insists these moves are defensive, forced by NATO's growing presence. Russian officials repeatedly stress that their actions are a direct response to what they perceive as encroachment by Western forces. The message to both domestic and international audiences is one of reluctant necessity, not aggression. Accusations fly over NATO exercises in the Baltic, with Russia viewing them as rehearsals for war, particularly regarding Kaliningrad. The region, already a flashpoint, has become a symbol of the broader standoff. Each military drill is scrutinized, each maneuver interpreted as a possible prelude to something far more serious. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov warns that Russia has taken all necessary measures to protect its interests, signaling both reassurance to Russians and deterrence to the West. His statements are carefully crafted, aiming to project strength without overtly threatening escalation, but the subtext is unmistakable. Russia is prepared for any outcome. The Kremlin frames its actions as a last resort, claiming it does not seek war, but will not rule it out. Military parades and displays of nuclear capability serve as stark reminders of the stakes involved. The government's narrative is one of reluctant preparedness, emphasizing that any conflict would be imposed upon Russia, not chosen. As tensions mount, the world is left to wonder how close we are to the brink. Leaders across the globe weigh their words carefully, aware that a single miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. The shadow of uncertainty looms large, leaving millions to hope that diplomacy will prevail over disaster. Alarm is spreading across Europe, as the continent faces a level of uncertainty not seen in decades. In city squares and quiet homes alike, people are glued to their screens, anxiously following every new development. The sense of unease is palpable, with conversations in cafes and workplaces turning to the possibility of war, a topic that once seemed unthinkable in modern Europe. European leaders are now warning that war between Russia and NATO is no longer a distant possibility, but a looming threat that could erupt with little warning. Emergency meetings are being held behind closed doors, and the language of diplomacy is giving way to the rhetoric of deterrence and defense. Serbian President Aleksandar Vucic, who has long tried to balance relations between East and West, has issued a stark warning. A direct confrontation could be just months away. His words are not isolated. Moscow, too, is echoing these concerns, fueling a sense of urgency across the continent. In response, Europe is rapidly militarizing. Arms factories are working around the clock, assembly lines are churning out military vehicles, and defense budgets are reaching record highs. This surge in military preparedness is meant to deter aggression, but it also increases the risk of misunderstandings or accidental conflict, as more weapons and troops are positioned near tense borders. Political leaders, once cautious in their language, now speak openly of the possibility of war. Their passionate speeches and somber warnings are eroding the psychological barrier that once kept the idea of conflict at bay. The unthinkable is slowly becoming part of everyday conversation, shifting public perception and heightening anxiety. These warnings are not just political theater, they serve as a wake-up call to the world. Urgent sessions at the United Nations and emergency meetings among international leaders underscore the gravity of the moment, as the global community is forced to confront the real possibility of a major conflict on European soil. The risk is no longer theoretical, it is real and growing. Military exercises are taking place near borders, soldiers are on high alert, and civilians are increasingly aware of the heightened security presence in their cities. Dire predictions are now coming from heads of state, not just analysts or commentators. The warnings are clear, and the stakes could not be higher. The peace that Europe once took for granted is now in jeopardy. Across the continent, people gather for anti-war protests and candlelight vigils, hoping that reason will prevail before it is too late. European nations are rearming at a pace unseen in generations, driven by fears of Russian aggression. Poland leads the charge, raising its defense budget to nearly 5% of GDP and transforming itself into a military powerhouse. Germany and others are following suit, signaling to Moscow that Europe is serious about its defense. Russia, however, sees this buildup as provocative and destabilizing, accusing the West of inflating the Russian threat to justify massive military spending. The Kremlin argues that this arms race is a deliberate Western strategy to perpetuate confrontation and contain Russia. Each side's actions reinforce the other's fears, fueling a cycle of escalation. The result? A continent locked in a dangerous spiral of mistrust and militarization. To understand the standoff, we must see through Moscow's eyes. Russia blames decades of NATO expansion for the current crisis, viewing the alliance's growth as a violation of post-Cold War assurances. The 2008 NATO summit's promise to Ukraine and Georgia crossed a red line for Russia, setting the stage for confrontation. Moscow sees the Maidan Revolution and Ukraine's westward shift as Western-backed moves that threatened Russian interests and Russian-speaking populations. The annexation of Crimea and support for separatists are framed as defensive, not aggressive. Russia views its actions as a response to a long-term Western policy of containment. This narrative of a besieged fortress shapes the Kremlin's resolve and its unwillingness to back down. The Kremlin accuses Western governments of exaggerating the Russian threat to distract from their own internal problems, economic woes, inflation, and political divisions. Moscow claims the Russian threat unites the EU and justifies unpopular military spending, painting the confrontation as a manufactured crisis serving Western elites. Russian intelligence has even accused the UK of plotting false flag attacks to escalate tensions, claims dismissed as disinformation by the West but widely reported in Russia. These accusations harden Russia's stance and delegitimize Western concerns. By framing itself as the victim of a grand scheme, Russia justifies its military posture and prepares its people for a long struggle. The result is a society primed for confrontation, convinced it is defending truth against Western deceit. The crisis is fueled by two irreconcilable narratives. The West sees Russia as an aggressor violating international law, justifying NATO's expansion and military buildup as defensive. Russia sees itself as encircled and betrayed, forced to act by Western hostility and broken promises. Each side views the other's actions as proof of malign intent, making dialogue nearly impossible. NATO's exercises are seen by Moscow as attack rehearsals. Russia's hybrid tactics are seen by NATO as destabilization. Trust has collapsed, and both sides believe they are acting defensively. There is no middle ground, only a cycle of escalation. Two opposing truths now define the standoff. The risk of miscalculation grows with every passing day. Beneath the geopolitical struggle, ordinary people pay the highest price. Ukrainians endure daily terror, bombings, displacement, and trauma, while civilians bear the brunt of the violence. Across Europe, defense spending diverts funds from social needs, and sanctions drive up living costs, fueling anxiety and division. In Russia, families grieve lost loved ones, and the economy is strained by war and isolation. The state's siege mentality stifles dissent and deepens divisions. The greatest loss is hope. The dream of a peaceful, united Europe has given way to a new era of division and fear. A generation raised on optimism now faces a continent split by hostility. The normalization of conflict is a tragedy for all who simply want peace. As 2025 draws to a close, the world stands at a crossroads, facing a level of tension not seen in decades. The need for de-escalation is not just important, it is absolutely urgent. Every passing day brings new headlines of crisis, and the sense of unease grows stronger across continents. The clock is ticking, and the stakes could not be higher. The normalization of war talk in our daily lives is itself a danger. When conflict becomes routine in our conversations and media, it lowers the barriers to actual confrontation. This constant exposure to the language of war can numb us to the real risks, making escalation seem inevitable rather than preventable. In this climate, leaders have a profound responsibility. They must pull back from the brink, reopen channels of communication, and actively seek off-ramps to avoid catastrophe. Diplomatic engagement, even when difficult, is the only way to prevent misunderstandings from spiraling out of control. A direct Russia-NATO war would be catastrophic, unleashing devastation on a scale that would affect not just the immediate region, but the entire globe. The consequences would ripple through economies, societies, and generations to come. The path forward demands courage, compromise, and a willingness to address the core security concerns of all parties involved. Only through honest dialogue and mutual respect can lasting solutions be found. Re-establishing deconfliction lines, exploring new arms control agreements, and earnestly seeking a just and durable peace in Ukraine are essential steps. These actions can help rebuild trust and reduce the risk of accidental escalation. Ultimately, the hope for peace rests on our shared humanity and the universal desire for security, stability, and a better future for the next generation. It is this common ground that must guide our actions. The window for diplomacy is closing, but it is not yet shut. If wisdom, restraint, and empathy prevail, a path away from the abyss can still be found. The world is watching, and the time to act is now.